Okay, so hi, happy Thursday. Thanks everyone for joining. Looks like we even have more people joining, which is great. In case you missed the message / announcement, today's meeting is really intended to go over the work that the SLA work group has done. They've asked to present the work, and I asked them kindly to wait a few weeks so that we can push out 3.1, and now that's out. We definitely can do that. So that's pretty much going to be the focus specifically for today. And beyond that, the floor is yours. Yeah. So.
Good, excellent. Thank you for the opportunity. So we have a brief presentation focused. We will try to do it in less than 20 minutes, just to have enough time to deal with other topics and also have questions. So first of all, congratulations for having the new spec on the street, the 3.1. Congratulations to all the TSC. And I will try to start sharing my screen. So I will start sharing. Do I need permissions to do that? Maybe, Neil?
No, you should be able to share your screen.
I'm looking for the place. I'm not seeing that.
Normally
Maybe
at the bottom.
to be presenter. Could be.
Let me see.
Could be.
I don't see a restriction. Let's see if I can.
I don't have the tools to do it.
Yeah, you should have a green button at the bottom of the screen.
Oh yeah. You're right. You're right. Now found it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. No.
Okay. Can you see my screen now? I guess.
Yes.
You. Okay. So we have everything to start. Thank you. Okay, so basically this is what we wanted to share with you today. We have a special interest group that we have been working for several months, working on SLAs on top of OpenAPI. So we wanted just to bring that here to the TSC just to show the work we have done, look for feedback and proper alignment with in the long term with OpenAPI. Okay. So basically, the problem necessity that motivates this thing. Many APIs are published under service level agreements, but they are done in an informal level. There is not a standard for this till the moment. So we wanted to set up something very minimal that will allow us to express these server levels agreements. So we can use that for different use cases. For example, documentations, price plans, publication, feature cost comparisons, to measure the specific SLA or enforcing it, to combine different APIs and calculate the combined SLA, and also to configure an SLA in a middleware, maybe product for APIs to enforce that and measure. So these are some of the use cases we see we can cover with extra semantic that we will incorporate. Yeah. So to work on that, we have organized as a special interest group inside OpenAPI, as commented before. We have a Slack channel called SLA, of course. We have a mailing list. Here you have the link. We will publish this material, by the way. We have wiki also, repo, and the spec that Pablo is going to present in a few seconds. Thank you to all of the people that have helped us to bring us here. This is just not a people for 2-3 people, but many more. So here you have all the names and all the companies that have been involved in this effort so far. So now I think it's time for Pablo to describe a little more about the spec, the concepts, and going to the document itself. And then later we can discuss about the roadmap and ask for questions. Okay. So now, Pablo, it's up to you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. So hopefully you will, I'm going to be starting right now. Hope you see my my screen now. Can you see my screen, current
Yes.
spec? Yeah, okay. So basically the main goal of the spec is to have a very pragmatic approach to have a minimal first version so we can start working and have an iteration little by little with new features. So currently the minimal spec, as we have been discussing in the group, only represents an SLA as a set of plans, like free plan, premium plan, that has different limitations in terms of rates or quotas and some very basic pricing mechanism.
Sorry, Pablo. Pablo,
sorry?
we are seeing your JSON schema browser. Maybe it's not the one you want to share.
That's not the one. Yeah, exactly. You're right. Sorry. 1 second. Yeah, because I was checking actually one thing in the last minute. That's a problem of having several screens. So can you see now a figure of the current spec? Is it the right one? Okay.
Yes.
So as I was saying, that the SLA is a set of plans, and each plan could have different rates or quotas. And the rates and quotas are basically limitations over the API or over the paths that we have in our API concerning a given metric, like, for example, number of requests or throughput or bandwidth, whatever the metric you could name of. And then these rates and quotas are, of course, related to a specific resource. And by resource, we mean a path or a method and a method. And also, we have a very simple, as well, placeholder for the temporal constraints where the API is available. Typically, you have 24/7, but you can specify other kind of ranges. Let me go through very quick example so you can have a specific overview of the spec. As Pedro was mentioning, we have used the same approach than the OpenAPI spec with a wiki method to coordinate all the different people and try to have a pull request to include the different proposals. We use also the same validation of the Markdown that the OpenAPI spec is using in their repo with automation. And we have designed a very simplistic logo that is like a shield with the OpenAPI spec inside of it. So the SLA for OpenAPI, the current draft, we can see here this is going to be a very simple document that the idea would be to be linked in the info section of the OpenAPI spec. Currently, we are thinking in a separate file, but later on we can discuss the different ways that we can link it through overlays, etc. But this is the simplistic approach currently. And the best way to understand the spec, I think, is with a very simple example. So you can see here. Let me do a quick zoom so you can. So basically, we will have a context where we have general information about the API and the provider. Then we have a list of metrics that they're going to be just name of metrics with a JSON schema like approach as the one that OpenAPI spec has in their data. And then we will have some plans. We can have a base plan that has like the default plan that will be applicable to the default limits and default options for the rest of plans. And then you can specify a set of different plans. This is a free name. And for each of the plans, you will have either rates or quotas. The differentiation is it depends on the way of the monitoring. The rates has a dynamic window, so you have a rate that is dynamic to the point in time where the user is consuming. So you can have like 1 minute rate is going to be in a certain time point in time is going to be calculated in the last minute, or you can have quotas that are static windows, like that will be reset at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day for all the customers at the same time, or for all the API consumers. in both cases, you will have a resource, a method, as in the OpenAPI spec, and then you will have the specific limitation that for the metric that you have already defined, you will have a maximum, medium in a period. As you can see, it's very, very, in my opinion, intuitive. We wanted to have a very simplistic approach as the one that has in the OpenAPI spec that is very clear and very easy to understand by developers. And basically that's about it. The only other element that we could have is the cost of a given plan inside of a section that is called pricing, and the availability that is relying on the ISO spec for time pieces. And that's about it. I wouldn't like to spend a long time. You can have the public wiki with the specification as in the same level of detail that we have in the OpenAPI spec. So, well, basically, we are currently, we have finished this minimal approach, and we agree in the team, in the interest group, we agreed that this is enough for a first minimal spec. But we are not, we are still working on different evolutions that we can have in the future, but for future versions of the spec. One is the alternatives to create the extensions and linking mechanism. And we have specifically a discussion open as an issue in the repo with different options, with patterns, targets to make it open to different ways of linking and to have a globing mechanism. So you can apply one limit to all the operations, things like that. And well, our idea is to have, once we have this rolling to little by little to create new versions. And we would like to be as aligned as possible to the OpenAPI spec. And also we would like to have a compatible specification that works also for async APIs, asynchronous APIs. And by the way, one of the members of the async API initiative has been participating in the interest group. So that was very fruitful. And well, that's about it. I would like to push on just to highlight all the different links that you have to get more info. And I think the most interesting part is now to start an open discussion and of course to hear some feedback from you about all of the participants today, and to discuss next steps that we are having. So.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pablo. So now it's time for questions and answers. As the extension points, one of the main hot topic we are talking about is about the extensibility. This should be, we incorporate this info inside the spec, inside the document as extensions. Should we do it apart with an extension point? Should we use overlays? But the overlays are not yet part of the spec. So we need to defer that question till the point where we incorporate overlays. So this is what we came here just to the TSC, just for feedback. What do you think what we should use? Because we want your advice on that. Yeah. And also if you like the idea and we are looking for some kind of support from the TSC just to publish this information and to make it available, just to get some momentum or minimum specification for defining SLAs that we can promote, just to get some seed of the future standard for that. So please open your mics, feel free to ask questions if any. Yeah. Any questions?
Hi, yeah. This is Miguel Quintero from Delta Airlines. So I just have a question. Thank you for your presentation. So on our space, I've had some folks ask me about SLAs and APIs, and I didn't have an answer. But so the intent eventually, say, would be to say, for example, I have a spec, I have some vendor extensions that follow this SLA spec, and then say import that into some sort of gateway or API management solution, and then voila, all the, for example, the policies, et cetera, will fall into place without writing a single line of code and so on and so forth, right? Is that the goal?
Yes.
That's a very good point. I mean, that's one of the points is, I mean, the general goal is to create an explicit way specifying things that are vendor neutral, like OpenAPI Spec, that could be useful for tooling. So we can have tools that are aligned with the enforcing, like API gateways or policies, or configuration of policies of an infrastructure. So for those kind of tools to have this kind of information explicit, we can have a very simple way to set up a system based on this spec, at least the most basic limitation configuration. But also there are other kind of tools that could be very useful as well. For example, I could imagine some scaffolding as the one that we're using for the typical, one of the most useful things of the OpenAPI specs that allows you very quickly scaffold APIs and microservices, either as a provider or even to create a consumer for like a client. So with this kind of extensions, you can enrich this scaffolding for having like some throttling that respect the SLA. For example, if you are connecting to somebody that has an SLA, or even you can have some documentation or some interesting applicabilities in the field of the testing. So, because if you have these explicitly put there, you can have some evolution of the testing tools that could be aware of the SLA and try to see if your API resists like a SLA testing, or if you could create dynamically a set of users or scenarios that has the SLAs with different kind of plans if you have already set up this definition. So answering to your question, there are multiple uses, even for a very basic spec like the one we're showing. We could think about different kind of applicability in different tools as the one that you're mentioning, API gateways, but also in other cases.
We have also a comment from Jonathan Stojkovic. He said, why wait for overlays? You can use any patch mechanisms, no? Well, in fact, yes, we can do that. Yeah, but I just was thinking what could be more useful for tools to use. So this is the question is still open in that way. We also need to reference elements of the spec. We need to reference path APIs, method operations, basically, and some part of the internal structure of the document are already linked by containment. For example, we have plans have limits. So all of this is under control. When we have external references is when we can use what should we use? XPath, we should use await for overlay. So there's still some options we can still decide where to use. So it's good to have opinions on that.
Yeah, my point was that I think the proposed, I mean, there's still a lot of things that we need to do to get to an agreement on overlays. But I think one thing that we agreed is that this would have to be a separate spec that's like agnostic from OpenAPI or async API or anything that it can support. And so if that's the case, that would mean that everything would happen at pre-processing. So if everything happens at pre-processing, it doesn't really matter, I think, at this point, for the sake of, having a sort of a proof of concept or visibility on what it would look like. It doesn't really matter what the mechanics are, because it all happens at pre-processing. So maybe what you can show, if you want to have such, if you want to see what it looks like, what you could do is like apply any merge patch mechanism as ugly as it is over an OpenAPI document with the SLA definition and see what it looks like when it's applied over it.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. We can explore that to see how it look like. Yeah.
Yeah, because the SLA document itself would exist as an extension. So even if you put it directly within an OpenAPI document rather than referencing it, those objects as defined in the SLA specification don't exist within an OpenAPI document. So I don't think an overlay is really terribly helpful, because all it's going to do is import an extension, which you can do with your reference mechanism. I had a quick look through the specification again to remind myself of where you're up to yesterday. Some of the concepts, I think, need a little bit more aligning with those in the current version of OpenAPI, like the use of a reference. If we can tie down that a reference in SLA specification works exactly the same way as a reference object in OpenAPI 3.1, I think that will help a lot of people get to grips with it. It'll help tooling be able to process these documents in a consistent manner. On an unrelated point, have you got sort of trial data or people wanting to work with this specification now outside your group?
Yes, we have get well, you know, in the SIG, this is not only, you know, sorry, but I didn't introduce Pablo. Pablo is from the University of Seville, for the people who didn't know, the ISA group. But we are not only always developing this alone. There are people from Google, there are people from PayPal, from Apimetrics, other members from OpenAPI are pushing on this. And also we get a request getting for help from the Geo. Do you remember the name, Pablo?
Yes, OpenGeo OGC.
Yeah, there is an external groups interested in these kind of things, and also we get requests from the outside asking, do we have a standard for this? So more people is getting attention on that. So I think there is a consensus that we need some kind of a standard for defining SLAs. So
if I may, also since I'm from the research world. From the academia, we have a couple of research papers doing a survey on the industry, reviewing like 200 APIs to analyze the need of pricing and limitation specification. So, and have defined a data set of 40 real-world APIs that has these kind of limitations, that like the one that we are looking at. But unfortunately, but of course, the conclusions of those research papers are that this is a very used, important information that is used in the real world, but most of the time is not systematically defined. It's just a natural language in a pricing web page where we have that info. And then we have the same problem we have when you don't have an OpenAPI spec. In the past, you have like a documentation of for the developers in a natural language, but you don't have this kind of tooling that helps. So I would say that this research report somehow demonstrate the need for or the usefulness of this kind of approaches, because it is a real need from the industry. I don't know if that answered your question, Mike, or
yeah, absolutely. It was really just to get a little bit more background on who might be sort of using this internally, who's helping develop it, and whether people have got real world experience of implementing this against their APIs and saying we can generate a machine readable definition of our SLA, and we can actually use it for this use case. Where do you see the specification going next? What are your sort of questions that you have about extending the specification, or getting it to a point where we can publicize it and get people implementing?
Well, in my opinion, the next step should be to create a tooling ecosystem that exploits the very, very first minimal spec. Like, for example, even with a very simple testing or tools that use this kind of info, or for documentation portal, automatically develop documentation portal for the SLA as the Swagger UI that has a lot of success. That's one thing from the perspective of where do I, in my opinion, I see the next step here is that tooling, that push in terms of tooling. But on the spec, from the specs perspective, if I had to choose one very next step, in my opinion, would be the globing mechanism that we have been discussing, because it's very, very common that you have the very same limitation for the whole. For example, the GitHub API has a rate limit for all his different for all his paths of 2 or 3 requests per second, or something like that. So in the current spec, you should be specifying all the different paths and have this very same rate everywhere. So that's very annoying in terms of modeling. But this you can think about a very simple sugaring syntax, or for some kind of that kind of stuff. But in my opinion, as a conclusion, is tooling, demonstrate the usefulness of this, and then we can evolve with very little sugaring syntax to come on. But this is my opinion.
More questions?
What are your thoughts on? Well, first of all, my name is Ken Lane. I'm hi, you guys.
Hello.
Big fan, longtime follower. What are your guys' thoughts on it being used in a modular way? So I'm just interested in using the plans portion of it, and I'm not ready for the full SLA.
Yeah, totally. This is a use case for that. If you are interested in only defining my plan cases, my plan price, for example, and not using the quotas rate limit, no limitations, that's a fair use case, just to define the plans. Yeah. As commented before, people will approach this with different objective in mind. So why to put barriers to that? Let's discover what people are interested in.
Yeah, and I would say from an operational, like a phased rollout of this would be ideal for some teams. Hey, I'm just going to express my plans and be able to articulate this, and then hey, I'm going to add on monitoring and actually start reporting and gathering in a constructive way, and then all right, now we're going to do the SLA, because I would feel that's one of, while I think many of us in the space always focus on the right thing to do. I think when it comes to prioritization in many organizations, it's why security isn't always there, or, not everyone's like comfortable with having an SLA, like because we screw up, even though we need one and we say we have one, but like we don't actually want to report on it, because then we have to actually do something and act on it. So, so those are my thoughts on the rollout. I would say, backing up, these aren't really questions. These are just kind of my comments and thoughts on how to move this out of, pun intended, academic into something actually being real and being used. And then my concerns, I see all of these as being separate components that all work in concert. And then I would like to see, just for not just this as a extension or as a evolution of the spec, that we have a program in the OAI for handling extensions and understanding extensions, and then creating a safe area or a sanctioned area, saying, hey, these extensions are needed, have a lot of work put into them, clearly, and you guys are kind of the flagship. The model of this is you guys know I've been following you since you guys first started, and you guys have put a lot of work into this. I would love if the OAI could could carve out a space and say, hey, these are sanctioned extensions. They're not part of the core. And that maybe we could then have a graduation process when more data comes in that supports what Mike, was getting at, is who's using it, where is it being used, what tools are built around it. Then we could maybe lose the X dash, and it gets another kind of graduated extension that says, hey, it's not part of the core spec. You don't have to do it, but here's one, and here, so it can get some of the same love and attention as the core spec, but we don't actually have to have it be, everyone feels like, oh, I don't have to use that if I don't want to. And so I would love to think more about that, but then I also have concerns about, should it live within the OAI? And I think I've expressed these to you guys before. And your conversations with async is, really proves that for me, is this is something that should live beyond just the OpenAPI spec and for HTTP 1.1 APIs, in my opinion. And so I would love to figure that out. But with all that said, I want to figure out how, I feel like we've been at the cusp of for quite some time now that, hey, this is important. And the OAI should be supporting it, but I know there's also a lot of apprehension of like, should it live in the core, and be part of it. And I would like to get past that point, and I would like to figure out how we do that as a group. I don't have all the answers. I just kind of wanted to talk openly about it. So.
Well, that's the main objective for today, just to know what work we have been doing and look for the best way to align, and to also to have support from OpenAPI to make these people to use if found useful.
And I appreciate I think that was very good ideas. This idea of a general sort of maturity level for extensions and like levels, that's very, very interesting. And I do agree that could be very, very helpful. And thank you very much for the different comments. And I totally agree. And the idea of, perhaps we can have different paths inside of the OpenAPI spec, but also in a general way as well. So we could, if we could have this balance of highly aligned with OpenAPI spec, but also be useful for other specs, that could be tremendous, and that could be very, very, very good. I do agree with everything that you just said, Kim. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what Kim was saying about you guys are the sort of incubator for this process. Security is another aspect where we're looking at possibly extending what you can say about security in the OpenAPI spec, and we've got people on the call who know far more about that than I do. So what we learn from this process about having an extension, like say as it matures, or an additional specification, maybe within the OAI, maybe not. We're going to learn a lot more about that process and how it can apply to other use cases. So I think I really appreciate the work everybody's done on this.
Excellent. So I think that's all that we have for today. We will invite you to help us just in the mailing list, asking questions here, or open a pull request. So we are quite open to everyone who want to collaborate. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe before we adjourn, I have some questions about the spec details. Is that worth getting into this level rather than the high level strategic piece, or would you rather do that in GitHub?
As you wish. If we have time, I'm absolutely we are happy to do it. I don't know if we have time.
Ron will tell us if we are on time or we should put it.
We were on the agenda, I think, correct, Mike?
Yeah, exactly. It's the only item that we want to cover.
Okay, so
I'd rather cover as much of it as we can in one meeting, and then if we've got time for just introductions and any other business at the end, that'd be cool.
Yeah, to totally use. We dedicated this hour for that.
Okay,
so.
okay. Then Mars, go on.
Okay, thanks. So a couple of smaller observations and a couple of larger ones. So one is that I would expect that plans will change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been discussion about how to revision specific or indicate specific revisions of a plan? Because customers may have legacy pricing options, for instance.
Well, concerning that, the naive approach that we currently have in mind would be based on versions, and so you have different versions of the SLA that you will have with the evolution of the different plans. So, but not a serious discussion on how could be that explicitly said. That's a simplistic approach currently in the current minimal spec.
Yes, but it's a good question. It's a good requirement for that. I'm thinking thinking that maybe we can add just a date starting the plan date and end date for plan, so we have a time frame for that. So that could help to know where the plan is live, right? For example, but maybe we can implement some kind of versioning on top of that, depending on what people need to. So if you have specific requirements for the life cycle of the plan, please tell us, and we'll try to incorporate in the next version.
And that's one of the things that makes it so interesting, is because this is about a contract for your contract, right? It's a meta contract.
Exactly.
And that's why I think it fits so nicely as an overlay, because it's clearly not the contract itself. It's really about the non-functional entitlements that are layered on top.
Exactly.
The second sort of related piece to that was about private plans. Like, I imagine in an enterprise business, you may have some plans that aren't published, but you still want to be able to represent this information. You wouldn't want people to know the existence of these plans necessarily. And so I think maybe the way in which you have it, where you're referring to the parent spec as a property of the SLA document, might enable that, because if you don't have access to that resource, then you don't see it. But it was just an interesting thing that I was considering while in your spec.
Whenever we deal with permissions, I have done this also for OpenAPI spec. Let's suppose we have 100 operations, but I'm not allowed to see half of them. If you make that generation of the document dynamic, you can expose to me only what I can see and hide all the other things that not. This is applicable to OpenAPI docs. It's applicable to this kind of things. But of course, you need to put some filter in the middle to put apart the things that you cannot see.
And it then sort of dovetails with the question, well, how do you now track different revisions of these things together and separately? It's an interesting problem.
It's about versioning. Maybe we can just publish different versions and use unique URLs to specific versions.
It's my sense that the spec is more oriented toward communicating to consumers what the available plans are than it is to runtime enforcement. Is that reasonable? I mean, that's my opinion of the spec in general for describing the contract. Do you think that's consistent or inconsistent with your approach?
I would say that that is the main, the most. I could imagine that the first tools that could have some benefits using this spec would be the one that related to the relationship between customers and providers. So definitely, like a public version of the API or the client that uses the API could take this spec into account to have some throttling, as I was suggesting. But also, I would say that it could be very useful as well for the provider to set up some things of the provisioning infrastructure, because one of the key things is that this person has some specific plan. So you could have a subset, you can have the actual SLA of a given customer in the same format. So you can have the configuration of the gateway in terms of limitations for that given customer with the very same spec. Of course, for a realistic provisioning infrastructure, you will have much more configuration options, lots of configuration options that maybe could be vendor specific. but it's a very general situation that you need to specify limits for this kind of users, and these premium users, free users will have these limitations, and a very basic setup of this limitation could be very useful as well for the consumers, for the infrastructure providers of the API.
I think now that I've thought about it just a tiny bit more, I think it may be a useful principle, and others on the call please disagree if you think this isn't right. But I think it's hard to be all things to all people. And so when it comes down to any sort of conflict of interest between provider side or consumer side, I would prefer to do what's right for consumers and figure out how to deal with the complexity on the provider side secondarily.
Yes, and also I see your point, Mars. I see that if you are interested in providing a consumer approach view, you start from the plans and then define the limitation for the different operation. If you are the provider, you start the other way around. I have my operation, I put the limit on the operation, and maybe I define different level of quality for these consumers. And then someone else, maybe at marketing, they group that together in a plan. So it depends a lot of where you start working with. Yeah. So we need definitely to support both ways of working.
Yeah, my point is mostly just to put it when in doubt, prioritize consumer use case. But it sounds like you've been thinking about this already.
Yeah.
I did notice that you referred to the operation name or the method name. I think I was curious if there have been discussions about whether to support the optional operation ID as well, or as an alternative.
Yeah, I mean, that could be an option between the linking of the, actually that's aligned with the discussion of the that we have currently going on how to link the limits to the actual element in the spec. So we can think about paths and operations, but also we could think about and also in here, we will, you could have a specific ID that then you link it with an overlay, but perhaps another option of linking would be through the operation ID as well. That could be another option. Could be interesting.
Yeah, I second that. The operation ID needs that continued reinforcement as that identifier. I think it's important.
Yeah, but we also found that sometimes you want to set up a rate limit for all the operation or a lot of operations. So we need some kind of globbing, just to use the asterisk for something like that, or regex or any other form that. But before introducing that, we want to align with the TSC, because we know different technologies to do globbing, to do regex, to do references. So better to get an agreement on that and follow that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I would add tagging, is another opportunity there, so definitely back at, to Mike's point is let's get it out there. Let's get people's feedback. Let's get people using it and for different reasons. So
the tagging is a great way to approach this. One challenge that would be to how to differentiate plan-oriented tags from other tags that are descriptive about the function, and maybe there's a way to prefix it or something.
Yeah, and if you look at how AWS is using tagging when it comes to billing and stuff like that, I think there's a pretty big opportunity to go that route.
Yeah.
Good.
A couple other things that I think might be interesting are like a link to a pricing page. Like particularly if I like the standardizing on non-currency specific units. I think that's wise. But then the next question will be, how do I understand how I purchase that currency or that virtual credit? And so having a link, not unlike the external API docs support or links to the terms of service in the info block, like that, it seems like that may be a natural piece, but I imagine you've thought about this more than I have.
Well, and I would say that reflects back what you said earlier about private APIs. Is one of the API management gateways I've supported is API Umbrella. It's come out of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and it's used by data.gov. We used it as part of the rollout of APIs in US government. And they do that oftentimes to just measure value exchange between departments and between agencies. Hey, I'm Department of Energy. NOAA is using X amount of our API resources, and we invoice and we bill them for that. but there's no actual money exchange. It's just, here's the value exchange between us, and it quantifies so that I can go back to my boss and go, hey, look, people are using my API, they're dependent on it, please don't kill our budget. That kind of stuff. So.
It's interesting.
Makes
Or
sense.
even we can think about a specific coins, like with some blockchain currencies or things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Crypto,
That could be a very interesting thing.
I wanted to throw in one thing, build on what Marsh was saying on the plan portion is, I would love to see, and I can help contribute to this, is I would love to see some plans for top providers articulated using this format, and then communicate just that portion of it. Is say, hey, here's Stripe's API plans expressed in this format. Here's Twilio's, and so that, because then it just, it elevates it beyond just SLA, and it opens up the conversation. It brings it home to what people know, and then it introduces them to the concept of SLA, and it gets back to what I was saying about the modularity of this rollout, that maybe people aren't quite ready for an SLA. That's not a priority for them, but hey, having a plan, and then if there's a tool or a part of Redoc or Swagger UI that articulates that plan for me, that would be cool. That might be the doorway, the gateway drug for them to get involved.
Absolutely. That could be very cool. I mean, that could be very interesting. And even in that scenario, as you were saying, if you could have a very interesting tooling, would be like a mock server that also takes into account the SLA. So you can start using your API, your consumer, and then if you violate the SLA they give you, and you can have like a very first, you don't need to use the actual real service to understand that you are going to be filing the SLA with them or something like that. It could be very interesting with real scenarios.
Yeah, and put electrical shock collars on developers, so when they violate it, they get a nice jolt.
One step at a time. One step at a time.
Yeah, I've just got a quick question about not wanting to couple data in the OpenAPI document and the SLA document too closely, but would the SLA information apply to all of the servers defined in an OAS document? Could there be different levels of SLA applicable to different geographic servers or sandbox environment or something like that?
Well, something at the moment, the only link that we have is to our Spec. So the linking, the top level linking is between the OpenAPI Spec and the SLA. And there could not be, that possibility couldn't be possible, but I would definitely say that this is very interesting as an evolution of the SLA, we could have more complex linking. So you not only link to an spec, but also to an spec and an area and a server. That could be very interesting, actually.
Yeah,
well, very interesting.
I see that also as as properties of the plans. If you say, for example, you have different plans for Europe and Asia, maybe just 2 plans with a selector, just to choose the one that applies to you based on your zone, geographic zone, time, IP, whatever. Yeah.
So if the API spec represents an API product, the SLA is kind of applying to the product, and it's offering all of the different quality of service differentiations the product can offer. Now we will definitely have a tie-in into maybe a physical deployment or some way of having a product differentiation in form of its implementation. So definitely there is some room for that. So in fact, I'm right now struggling with this thing that the server on an API product, which is our main spec, is more like the access point into it. And it itself typically is kind of an API gateway that in turn could have a lot of physical deployment details behind it.
That's totally right. Yeah.
So another one quick thing I wanted to add is, as a future extension point, I think digital contracting, right? How do we take this SLA and make it kind of translate or facilitate a contract between a provider and a consumer? I think that is something. So this becomes the language that will enable that kind of the next level of sophistication in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that and echo some of what Marsh said is, not to, I think the name you guys have come up with is, SLA for Open APIs, I think speaks to what's happening here. But I think this is a contract for API contracts, and focusing on that, I think I don't know, you guys got to do some user group, focus group type stuff and get other people's opinion. I'm definitely biased, but I think focusing on the SLA, there might be other angles to focus on, whether it's, I would call it, I have a plan, it's like, it's, what is this? What is the focus of this? Is it about the SLA and being compensated for that? Is it about having a plan? Is it about just monitoring? There's many dimensions, and I think finding the right one that's going to speak to what's going to incentivize folks to get on board is important. But I think we can do that through some data gathering and use of it among some actual tooling providers and whatnot. So
that is so true. That is so true. Actually, the name of SLA, it's somehow an historical legacy of the beginnings of the process. But if we start today, all this process, and not 5 years ago, I would call this customer agreement or API agreements or API pricing or API something like that, because SLAs is true that there are in very different areas. The meaning is more related with compensations and how you deal with some guarantees and compensations over stuff. But in general, SLA also, it's catchy in terms that somehow gives an idea that it's like a shield that protects both customers and providers on one way or the other. Yeah. But it's true. Perhaps, but it's very hard to change and evolve the name once all the process has been.
Yeah, I think when I first started writing about you guys, I used the phrase API reciprocity, to describe it, because it was very much that reciprocity between a provider and a consumer. But yeah, keep thinking about it and playing with it. I mean, you guys, once it takes off, you guys, once you hire a big marketing team and they can tackle that for you.
Okay.
I think it's a really good point. When you come at it thinking that this is an SLA solution, you may miss the other really important use cases. And so there's never a better time to reconsider the name than now, or figure out how to position it in such a way that you're focused on the usage levels, and that you can also have SLA type information too, including quota oriented usage expectations, right? You may have in these different pricing plans that there are different expectations on response time by support, 24 hours or an hour. And I think having the ability to reflect some of those that aren't specific about the API contract itself might be worth considering. And you have to draw a line somewhere. Like, you can't be all things to all people, for sure. That's going to be the hard part. I had one minor point, unless someone wants to jump in on that topic. I had one more minor point on my list, which was the period seemed to be maybe not descriptive enough. Like, there are times I've heard customers talk about wanting to have a 3-year engagement. So having I think having standard approaches for like minute, hour, day, week, month, year might work, or even quarter. But having the ability to put a number by those to modify them might make them more flexible. There's been a lot of variation in my experience.
Interesting also too. Yeah. I have a question for the general group here. Is, what do you think is the right step now to make it public? And what do you think is the right match to align with the OpenAPI spec? What is your opinion about it?
Well, that's a tough question. Maybe they will need some time to think about it.
Or at least, what is your feeling? What is your feeling about? Do you think we could I mean, in your opinion, we can start this process of making it more public or
yeah, I
perhaps
think,
discuss.
yeah, inside the group, we have this arrived to the conclusion that we clean up whatever we can and say, wait, this is ready to go as the first version. We need to make it public for people to get feedback. Otherwise, if no people know that, then we will get no feedback. So we will keep going with this. So I think it's time to go, to make it public, to make some noise, to get people on board, testing, and tell us what they don't like it. The best and the worst thing we can happen is that we can get a lot of issues to fix in the GitHub. And the worst thing is nobody say nothing because nobody is using, right?
I have lots of thoughts on this area. I will write up a list and I will share it with you guys. Because yeah, you need to get it out there. And having been someone who's regularly putting things out there and no one cares, like, don't expect people to care. Just let's get it out there. Let's get beating the drum, and then and find a way to get some folks using it and talking about it, and then continue the conversation. So
yeah, I think what we'll try and do is get an overlay conversation going. Now we've got 3.1 out. Very, very quickly in the next couple of weeks, we'll dedicate some time to where we are with overlays, what technology we want to use for that globbing mechanism, to see if that can help you firm up some of your questions around that.
Yeah, definitely. We want to align on that, whatever you choose.
Yeah, that was going to be actually one of my questions for the wider group here is, when are we going to start the overlay discussion? But thanks, Mike.
May well be next week. So I think we're just about at time. So I'd like to thank everybody, especially Pablo and Pedro, for the presentation. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. Yes, happy.
And I'll, yeah, thanks. I agree. I also think part of this is going to be a marketing problem and figuring out how to help shine a light on the incubation project as we try to make this a sort of standard, a joining specification. Will be interesting. So we'll talk more.
So Pablo and Pedro, right? I also represent an auto API kind of standardization group. Right? So they are kind of standardizing APIs for the automotive industry. And that's where we can, and they do a lot of these contracts that are automated. So this would be a good opportunity for us to test out whether we can meet their contract and monetization requirements. So
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Nikhil.
Yeah, so this is like Toyota dealing with all of their dealers, right? And they can figure out if they have APIs that could represent contracts. So
That's great. Well, so
okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and
thank you, everyone.
We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Take care.